talk about why things break. And this is a very short look at a subject that I spent the first couple of years of my engineering career doing until I got totally sick of bending and breaking things. This is this field called fracture mechanics. And this is why things really break catastrophically. All materials contain flaws. It could be a corrosion pit, it could be a surface gouge, an inclusion, or a part that's been fatigued. Under stress, those flaws can make a bunch of little cracks. That isn't much of a problem. But if the stress gets higher, the cracks can grow and they form a bigger crack. If it's a corrosive environment, the whole process can be accelerated. When the crack grows to a big enough length for the stress imposed, it will start to propagate. We've all seen that. You know, I don't care what you're working on, but all of a sudden a piece falls off. And that's where you've overstressed something for the cracks that exist in it. The cracks run and things fall apart. It could be a big problem if you're in an airplane. That starts with a little crack about the size of your finger. Likewise, pipelines. We'll get much more into this subject later, but pipelines are certainly not immune from the basics of fracture mechanics, where something starts a crack, stress grows the crack, and eventually the crack runs until you got pieces. I'm going to have to talk a little bit about welding. Welding is key to pipelines. This is just kind of a little drawing out of a metallurgical textbook about what the biggest problem with welded materials is. And you've got the base metal, you've got a V-notch where you're going to fill it with molten metal, and you have the zone right here next to the molten metal that gets very hot but doesn't melt. It recrystallizes. And then as this weld shrinks, it puts tension on that area. Virtually everything that you're going to see that breaks doesn't break in the weld, but it breaks right next to the weld in what's called the heat-affected zone. One way to reduce that is to preheat the pipe. And in some cases it's done, in some cases it isn't. But at the time this thing was built, arc welding was a very new process. Arc welding was really invented by a Frenchman in the 1800s, just after somebody made a big enough battery to do it. But as a commercial process, everything was riveted together until World War II came along. World War II, they needed a lot of stuff and they needed it quick, and riveting takes time. So they started building ships. They were called Liberty ships. You've probably heard of the Liberty ships. Out of welded up steel, and they were pushing these things out at an incredible pace. They had problems. A lot of them sank. Here's the most famous one. This is from the 2011 API, that's the American Petroleum Institute Summit in Expo on inspection. USS Schenectady. They welded her all up. They took her over to a dock. While it was sitting at the dock, on a nice calm day, they heard a pop and the thing broke in half. The cause of the failure is still discussed in the pipeline community, but it's a combination of that. At the time, people believed it was cold water because Liberty ships were breaking up on the northern route, and they thought it was the steel getting brittle. But after this one failed and broke in half in warm water, they realized it was a different problem, and they really didn't know enough about weld metallurgy, stress concentrations for large structures at that time. That was 42. 57, here's another welded structure that didn't do so well. She lasted 18 years. A lot of discussion about whatever happened to her, but there's little doubt in my mind that there were cracks. They got her to the critical stress level and she broke in half. And again, they're built in 1957, so this was after the pipeline was built. There was still a lot to be known about arc welding steel pipes, and there still is. If you go into the literature of pipelines, you can find papers after paper after paper about how to avoid the problems with stress in pipelines. Now I'm going to give you a little video about that, just to show you what locked up stress is about, because it's a little bit hard to explain, but this video makes it real clear. Here's a guy, he's cutting an old pipeline in half, and he's fancy, man. Watch him pass that lit torch. He's cut all the way around the thing, except right up at the top. So he passes the torch around and starts going for the last 6 inches of the pipe. Gets her cutting pretty good. It's a very, this guy knows what he's doing. He actually knows what's going to happen here. But he just keeps cutting away and cutting away, and all of a sudden, cuts enough of it so the crack runs. Boom! Now this is a pipeline welder. He comes up with a torch and it's still lit. These guys know what they're doing. You see the problem? There was a lot of stress locked up in that pipe. That's a pipe welder. That guy's pretty good. This is a pipeline, just to show you. This is the one, this was the Bridger pipeline. This is where the pipeline industry got to a whole new level. Yellowstone River was flooded. It was covered with ice. The supports washed out from this pipeline. Overstress, bending, caused it to crack and run. You'll notice that the crack is mostly right alongside the weld. And what made this spill particularly obnoxious is the first time people had to deal with an oil spill under the ice. And it did not go well. And it became a very, very big subject of discussion. And it particularly applies to Line 5, where it's on the Straits, but also where it crosses Indian River, Burt Lake. Actually, I'm far more in those areas concerned about a continuous leak than I am a catastrophic failure. A leak of 10 gallons a minute under the ice could go undetected for a very long time. Enbridge has a leak detection system, and it's a very good one, but it's only capable of getting down to about half of 1% resolution. So small leaks are very, very difficult to find. So you could have a leak that would never trip their system, would not be noticed, and yet could spill enough oil over a long period of time to be a very big problem. Stress. Now we're going to do a little bending stuff here, right? Maybe it's time so that I can bring this to life a little bit for a demonstration. I got some toys here. Pipelines are heavy. They got a lot of oil on them. The pipeline under the Straits weighs about 250 pounds a foot. Now, steel. This is very common, low-carbon steel, pretty much exactly what the pipeline is made out of. And we all know about steel. You can bend it. What makes it so very useful is it's elastic. You can spring it a little bit, and it springs back to shape, and you can put a lot of stress on it, and bounces back. That's why it makes good springs. Do it a little more, and it'll bend. We've just gone from the elastic zone, where the thing snaps back into shape, to plastically deforming the metal. Well, that's really cool, because you can make car parts and stuff out of it. Then, of course, if the stress gets too big, bad things happen, but still, this hasn't broken. This seems like it would be fine. Pipelines are different. Pipes are like cables on a bridge. Imagine this being in the Straits. It's got 300 miles of pipe hooked to it this way, 300 miles of pipe hooked to it this way. It can't really sag down very much because it's under tension and it's got a lot of weight on it. At some point, if the weight gets too much, stress keeps building. It gets to the point where there's cracks. That's what will happen to a pipeline. So now we're going to talk about the stresses a little bit. There's two kinds of stresses that are on a pipeline. From the pressure in the pipe. There's hoop stress, that's trying to blow it up this way, and there's longitudinal stress, because the pressure's trying to pull it out longer. But wait, there's more. There's also bending stress, because the pipe's heavy. I just demonstrated that. That pipe didn't have any weight on it. So, because the pipe is heavy, it has to have support. In the 1953 easement, I was very surprised to find that somebody that really knew pipeline engineering had been involved in this, because they set a limit on how much of this pipe could be hanging in space. And they said 75 feet of the pipe. And why did they choose 75 feet? Well, let's talk, just before we get into that, a little bit about the pipes.